The topic of the video for today is going to be about why people are so easily fooled by delusions, fraud, and I got this conversation topic idea while I was talking with my politics club of sorts. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday at the coffee shop nearby, and we eventually started talking about why people would fall for things like the Mormon religion or Donald Trump or anything of that nature. And so I thought that that was something that I should share with you guys through this video. What are the reasons for why people tend to fall for these things? Well, first of all, I don't think they necessarily fall for it per se. Like a used car salesman comes up to you and presents information that is false, and then you get tricked by it. This starts much earlier. In most cases. In most cases, you are a young child and you don't have any beliefs about the world. The world around you is mysterious and strange and wonderful and terrifying in a lot of ways. And so you don't have really any way to make coherent sense of the world through your young mind and age. And basically, what happens is one or two things happens. The adults around you either tell you that this is how things work, and you accept that and you cluster all your beliefs, all your observations around that idea, that belief, and you just build and build and build and build until you have your entire worldview. Or no one directly tells you that, but you just observe things throughout your daily life, and you build your worldview around that. So for today's picture, for the thumbnail, is the flat earth, and I put that up there. It's a different form of being bamboozled. These are the type of people who want to be fooled because they're paranoid about mainstream media, things like that, or rather mainstream science, things like that. So they're questioning everything. They're letting their minds be so open that their brains fall out. But the other type of being fooled that I was talking about is that of indoctrination, basically. But the thing is that the greatest harms that have ever befallen humanity basically comes from that of legends, myths, wrong ideas that start off as a teeny tiny seed, and then once it's planted in a sort of semi-fertile soil, grows into monstrous proportions. The clearest example of this is racism. Specifically, racism during the slave trade and sometime after it, up until, I guess, the 1920s, maybe. During the slave trade in the Americas, people, and specifically white people, quote unquote, people of European descent, because it depends upon which country you're in, literally believed that black people, Africans, are like some sort of archaic hominid type creature, like a Homo erectus or something like that. And if you look at it from that context, basically everything they do in terms of slavery is pretty justified, I would say, although many abolitionists basically believed the same thing that they did and still fought to end slavery. But, at least with this understanding, what the white masters would do to their slaves makes much more sense. And so these things start off as tiny little seeds. So, like with the idea of black people being stupid. That myth basically came about when slave owners bought their slaves, and as a form of resistance, the slaves basically played dumb, and they just refused to do work properly, and the masters thought to themselves, these people must be dumb. And so they spread that myth. They told all their white friends, and then the myth just spread and spread and spread until it became self-reinforcing, because then white people started expecting that from black people, and if black people started acting like smart in any way, the white people will get uncomfortable, even violently angry with it, because they would fear that this could lead to a potential uprising of some kind. And so they would freak out about that. But, from their point of view, that makes sense. And it's a self-reinforcing property, wherein, like, the Europeans start believing in one thing, and then the Africans come in, and then they don't believe in it, but they ham it up, basically, for the white slave owners. So that way they won't get into trouble. So it's a self-reinforcing type thing. And these myths that they propagated around black people, as time went on, got more and more crazy, right? Until you get to the end description of how a person in, like, 1830, a European white person, in 1830 would view black people. And the image that you would get is like some sort of sci-fi, like, xenomorph like creature. So, like, black people have, like, super tough skin. They're, like, have really high thresholds of pain, almost to superhuman level. They have super hard heads and probably, like, super tough bones and stronger muscles. And one slave owner guy wrote about how black people loved the sun so much. They could just stay out there for days on end. And in Africa, they were probably just wandering around the desert for days on end because they were so tough and so resistant to heat stroke, it didn't even bother them. And this was the same dude who then went on and wrote something like, the African has orangutan eyes. That's not my words, that's his words. And these orangutan eyes, like from an orangutan, right, help them see better in really bright sunlight, so that way they can do their work. Now, notice how basically these ideas are basically just self-reinforcement, self-fulfilling prophecies, because black people had to endure absolutely horrifically inhumane conditions. And because of that, they were really, really strong. And because of that, white people mistook that for them being some kind of superhuman organism of some kind, right? So that was how things were. And basically, it's an entire racist world building, is my point. They built an entire world view that if you look at it as like you come to it directly as a modern person, right? You think, well, of course black people are people. That's obvious. Is the sky blue? But then, like, once you get inside their heads and in the world that they lived in, right, how the roles that black people fulfilled in society and how that would make them behave, you start to realize that their racist mythology makes sense from what they're surrounded by anyways. Of course, there were people that question it, but they were probably like the small, crazy voices. But they eventually grew over time, though, I would admit that, but still. It was a giant racist myth building, and it was based off a small seed that grew over time. And that's the thing, is that humans have worldviews projected into their brains by their environment. And once they come across this worldview, they don't really change it. And two reasons, basically, I think, for that. that I could just come up with in my head. First of all, maybe there's an adaptation for it, for not changing your views with contrary information. I know that might sound odd, but maybe like sticking to a worldview stubbornly can help you pursue something more and more instead of quitting earlier, and thus giving you a survival advantage. The other one, though, probably makes more sense, is that you create this entire world in which you inhabit, in which everyone inhabits, and there's things that you do, and there's things that you expect other people to do, and it's like building a traffic lane. Like, so you got a crisscross thing, you got cars, and one side is one car, the other side's another car, red light, green light, yellow lights, stop signs, crosswalks, all things like that. 100% constructed, but it allows you to navigate, travel easily, and live with other people. And so that's what I think the main cause of this stuff is that it's a worldview, and it helps explain things, but it also gives you a purpose in it, and it gives you reasons to expect other people to behave in a certain way, and it's so as to like order the environment. And that way, if someone questions it, they question basically your entire identity and your entire system, and that's incredibly dangerous for you. So you just make stuff up in an attempt to preserve your social system. And so that's the main thrust of why people believe stuff that doesn't make any sense. I suppose that people also believe in things because it's comforting, or because they got tricked one time and they don't want to admit it, or because in the case of like the flat earthers, for instance, they don't want to believe the narrative because it's not satisfying enough, basically. So they go and they believe these myths about the earth being flat, etc., etc. And that's just what they do, how it works. So in reality, humans are built for logic, but they're not built for empiricism. So let me break that down a little bit. What is logic? So before the scientific method, philosophers in like ancient Greece, like Aristotle, would write and posit things about humanity through basically things that would sound right or would make logical sense based upon what they know. So, for instance, the idea that women are hysterical is based upon the idea, or the observation really, that women tended, at least in ancient Greek times, I suppose, to act in a certain way that would at least seem to the men to be irrational, and thus they would like seek an explanation for that, and so they would seek other things in their world to make sense of that explanation, like, for instance, a moving womb. I think that was the ancient Greeks. They would put that in, and then they built their entire structured worldview upon things that they see and things that would make logical sense from there. Empiricism then comes up and asks, well, how do you know that? What if there's some other third thing that you can't even see or don't know about that can totally just throw the idea out the window that you put up about there being moving wombs? Basically, in Aristotle's time, his logic basically reinforced the things, the way things already were, by solidifying it, by putting it into a framework where it's like biological and nature and rooted in necessity. And empiricism comes along and questions that entire thing and says, like, nah, what if the very foundations of your premises themselves are completely faulty? Specifically what empiricism asks is, prove it. Like, if women have moving wombs, then we can expect X, Y, Z to happen because of said moving wombs. And if we have that, then we can run a test and see if in fact, the wounds move because of this XYZ phenomenon, which basically means you can debunk it. Empiricism runs on falsibility. You can basically challenge your own premises about the world and either prove it false or true or somewhat false, somewhat true, right? You can do those things, and so you just reinforce that. Well, not reinforce it, but that's the difference between empiricism and logic. So when you look at these old racist treatises on black people and their abilities, you look at that and you see how the old slave owners built that assumption from all the things that they have seen and heard, and from also what their society assumes to be correct. And then the logic basically follows out from there. Like premise X is true, and because premise X is true, we can expect X, Y, and Z to be true. And you don't even really have to test it. So for instance, like say the orangutan eyes thing. I don't think this guy just whole cloth made it up. I think what happened is that he saw that black people were working directly in the really hot sun where everything was bright, and like everyone else had to cover their eyes or squint, but black people didn't. And the reason this guy was curious about that, but instead of like seeking out other explanations, like say black people had to adjust their eyes to the sunlight due to the working conditions they were in, and they just got used to it over time or something like that. He made an idea that that the eyes of black people must be similar to the eyes of an orangutan, because I guess an orangutan can see better in the sunlight, and that's the same thing for black people. Now here's the thing, empiricism doesn't automatically presume that black people are basically being oppressed horribly, and because they have to work in the sunlight, their eyes adjust to the sunlight. What empiricism will come around and say, okay, so let's get like 100 eyes from black people. Don't ask how they will do that. And let's get like 100 eyes from orangutans, and let's compare them. Now, of course, in real life, you would probably only get like a few dozen of each parts. But then you'd be like, okay, let's compare these eyes from black people to these eyes of orangutans. Now, the thing is, though, is that even then it could be wrong, right? Because there could be a scenario where, like, you compare the eyes of black people to the eyes of orangutans, and therefore, black people have orangutan eyes. But an even better mode of empiricism would be to take like a dozen eyes from white people and use that as the control between black people and orangutans and white people. So black people have eyes that look like orangutan eyes. Why is that? Well, if you put in the third thing, which is white people eyes, then the white person eyes would look very similar to the black people eyes, which would look very similar to the orangutan eyes. And then you realize the reason why the eyes of all three of these beings are the same is because humans share a common ancestry with apes. You can do empiricism, but it wouldn't necessarily debunk an already posited worldview like racism, right? You would have to add more things over time to be more thorough in your assumptions. So even then, empiricism doesn't work, but at least you have to prove your assumptions. You can't just posit that the eyes of black people are like that of orangutans because they can see better purportedly in sunlight, right? You actually have to compare said eyeballs side by side in order to prove your notion. It's a very autistic worldview, basically, but it's an autistic worldview that works, and it got us this far. But even then, empiricism isn't perfect, but that is basically why human beings, to sum things up, can't see correctly, because once their worldviews are set up, they can always just logic in some other thing, third thing, to like explain the other thing. The thing is, with empiricism, you would have to continuously check yourself, like, well, how do you know that's true? Well, how do you know that's true? Well, how do you know that's true? They don't do that. To sum things up, normal humans are really good at logic. They are. They are very good at logic. Believing in false worldviews doesn't necessarily negate that you're logical, okay? People can believe in, like, patently false things, but if you look at their internal logic, everything is completely explained perfectly. The issue is that they don't question their beliefs enough through empiricism. Empiricism is basically test every single variable and every single other possible explanation possible, including things that you see outside of your worldview. I guess another part of why people won't do that is because oftentimes they would see the worldviews of other people as evil. And this goes for both sides. People often think that the right is unscientific and illogical, but the left can also be unscientific and illogical. My last video was on race realism, and essentially, if you watched that video, you probably haven't, but if you watched it, you would know I don't believe in the blank slate theory, basically. Neither in sex nor in race. I don't believe in the theory of the blank slate. And that would be heretical to leftism. And the reason for that is not necessarily because they haven't studied the issue, per se. They think that the worldviews of the other person are evil, and therefore what they're saying cannot be correct. But an empiricist would always, as long as there's a good scientific argument for something, look at both sides. And that's my video. Thanks for watching.